Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs will come to order. We have a quorum present, so we'll enter into executive session to conduct committee business. Today we'll mark up two pieces of bipartisan legislation. S-1271, the Fend-off Fentanyl Act, an original bill offered by Ranking Member Scott and me, the Recovering Executive Compensation Obtained from Unaccountable Practices, the Recoup Act. These bipartisan bills we'll consider today will make our communities safer by helping stop the flow of dangerous fentanyl into our neighborhoods, and will make our economy fairer by holding bank executives accountable for their failures. Both bills are collaborations. Ranking Member Scott and I have taken feedback and ideas from members on and off this committee. We talked, we listened, we negotiated in good faith with each other on both bills. I particularly thank his staff and my extraordinary staff, not that his isn't extraordinary too, but I know mine better, for their work together. I want to thank all of our members. Literally every one of the members of this committee was involved. Committees come together to address one of the most significant crises of our time, the flood of dangerous illicit fentanyl that is taking thousands of lives and devastating communities in Ohio and South Carolina and around the country. Senator Scott and I listened to law enforcement and community leaders. We listened to advocates for Americans struggling with addiction. We worked together to introduce the Fend-off Fentanyl Act. We've nearly every member of our committee and more than half of all senators as co-sponsors. We're on the cusp of 60 co-sponsors, half at each party. We have a broad outside coalition pushing for this bill, everyone from the American Association for the Treatment of Opioid Dependence to the National Sheriff's Association to the Fraternal Order of Police. It's an issue that hits home for each of us. In 2021, fentanyl was involved in 80% of Ohio's unintentional drug overdose deaths. I hold roundtables all over the state, and I know my colleagues do too in their states. I hear over and over from Ohioans from all walks of life that we need new, more powerful tools to prevent the flow of this awful, increasingly more potent drug into our communities. It's why our bill uses our economic arsenal to target the foreign fentanyl supply chain, from the Chinese chemical suppliers to the Mexican cartel distributors to the money launderers profiting off the illicit drug trade. I want to thank my colleagues for joining this bill and look forward to continuing working with all of you to get this signed into law. We'll also consider the Recoup Act. This bill is part of the committee's response to the historic bank failures earlier this spring. Throughout the spring, we held hearings bringing before the committee the executives of these failed banks, the bank regulators, and experts on bank accountability. Republicans and Democrats alike agreed these executives failed at the basics of bank management, that they pushed an unsustainable business model because it increased short-term profits in their own compensation, that they ignored directives and warnings from regulators, that they took risky bets at the expense of their customers. They paid themselves bonuses right up until the moment the FDIC was forced to step in. American workers and their families should not be forced to pay the price for executives' risky bets that don't pay off, whether they're on Wall Street or whether they're in Silicon Valley. To most Americans, the lack of Wall Street accountability tracks with their entire experience with our economy. Workers face the consequences for bad decisions made in corporate headquarters. We know that. Executives who made these decisions too often ride off into the sunset with their bonuses and their stock options in tow. Americans will never forget that, by and large, the Wall Street executives who caused the 2008 financial crisis faced few consequences. Their profits, their bonuses were not clawed back. We will not let that happen again. Our bill with Senator Scott ensures that bank executives will face real accountability for gambling with customers' money. The bill does several key things. It will strengthen regulators' ability to ban or remove executives who fail to appropriately oversee and manage their banks. It will provide the FDIC authority to claw back compensation of failed bank executives, senior executives. It will increase and strengthen penalties against bad actors. It will require banks to adopt corporate governance and accountability standards that promote responsible management. Bank executives who take on too much risk and crash their banks shouldn't get to land on their feet. They shouldn't get to keep the profits they made by making bad bets with other people's money. They shouldn't get to take their bad behavior to another bank. I want to thank the members on and off this committee who introduced different bipartisan bills to address this problem. I thank Senator Warren and her co-sponsors. I thank Senator Reed and his co-sponsors. With bipartisan support on each bill, their work helped generate ideas build momentum for action and advance these efforts. I want to thank Senator Scott and his staff for working with my staff and me. We have bipartisan agreement on a comprehensive bill that cracks down on irresponsible executives who poorly manage their banks, who put customers and workers and the entire economy at risk. That tells me the ranking member and I have threaded the needle pretty well. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your hard work on this legislation. And frankly, thank you to your staff, and certainly my staff is amazing. I know that this legislation came together. We were working on the amendment process as late as 3:30 in the morning, and I thank my staff for their hard work, their dedication, and certainly their willingness to take into consideration not Republicans or Democrats, but the American people. At the end of the day, both of these pieces of legislation, the goal of the legislation is to make sure that we, A, have a more responsible response from bank execs, B, that the 70,000 Americans who lost their lives to fentanyl, that their families understand that we're serious about stopping the flow of fentanyl. I'll say that this is our first markup since 2019. Since becoming the ranking member here on the Banking Committee, I've repeatedly underscored the importance of regular order, or allowing our committee to debate and negotiate bills under our jurisdiction. This return to regular order is long overdue, sorely needed, and certainly celebrated. Today, we consider two common sense pieces of legislation. First, my Fentanyl Eradication and Narcotics Deterrence, or Fend-off Fentanyl Act. This bill will direct the Department of Treasury to use our economic sanction tools to choke off the profits of the Chinese precursor manufacturers and Mexican cartels that push fentanyl across our border, leading to the deaths of more than 70,000 Americans. I talk a lot about opportunity in this country, because it provided me with remarkable opportunities. But the deaths represent the loss of opportunity to fulfill one's purpose, to contribute to their own communities, and to achieve their version of the American dream. That is why I'm especially proud that the committee will take up my Fend-off Fentanyl bill. It's past time we sanction the manufacturers, the exporters, and the cartels that traffic and sell this poison by hitting them where it hurts the most, their bank accounts. Over 70,000 Americans died just last year, an all-time high, fueled by Mexican cartels trafficking these drugs across the wide-open southern border that this administration refuses to close. Again, these precursors from China are manufactured in labs in Mexico and are smuggled across our southern border and ports of entry by the Mexican cartels. Virtually all of us in this room know family members and or families in our communities who've lost a loved one. I've often spoken about my friend Alan Schau, former business dean at the College of Charleston, whose son at 27 years old, Alan Schau II, lost his life to fentanyl. It's a pain that no parent should ever experience, the pain of burying your kids. While nothing we can do here will bring back those we've lost, we should do something and everything we can to stop the flow of fentanyl into our communities so other families don't have to experience the same pain of the Schau family. So I want to thank the chairman and all the members of this committee for joining me in this effort. Today we get one step closer to getting Fend-off Fentanyl across the finish line and hopefully saving thousands upon thousands of American lives. Moving on to the second bill today, the Recoup Act. This bill represents a common sense solution that will protect the American taxpayer from holding the bag when bank mismanagement runs rampant and seeks to hold the leadership of failed banks accountable by requiring common sense corporate good governance requirements. And as we saw in the failures earlier this year, the bill would penalize bad actors for their gross negligence. Immediately after SVB and Signature Bank failed in March, I said that this was nothing short of a failure in three parts. First, the bank executives certainly mismanaged their banks. Second, a failure of the supervisors to do their jobs. And third, the Biden administration refuses to curb the reckless spending which fueled the highest inflation we've seen in 40 years. That historic inflation led to 10 interest rate hikes in a little more than a year and soaring costs for everyday families. As I understand it, shortly after the collapse of SVB, the CEO, Greg Beckler, fled to Hawaii while the American people were left holding the bag for billions, and now our institutions who did nothing wrong are having to pay the price for it. That's not right. There is little disagreement that these bank executives were completely derelict in their duties. In order to hold bank execs who act in a grossly negligent manner accountable, the clawback authority in this bill is tailored in that it applies to incentive and equity-based compensation in the event, and hopefully there won't be, another grossly negligent failed bank, thereby incentivizing bank execs to run their institutions in a prudent manner so the American taxpayer is not left footing the bill. There is a lot of press about these executives selling their stocks and taking bonuses days before the failures. That can't become the standard. But that only addresses part of the issue. Through the adoption of our manager's amendment, this bill will also shine a light into the black box of our regulators and how they operate in bringing much-needed transparency and accountability for the American people so that they can be confident that their bank supervisors aren't asleep at the wheel again. The Recoup Act is a common-sense solution to address accountability, and it is tailored to protect the American taxpayer. I look forward to discussing and marking up this bill, both of these bills, and which are important and timely legislation.
Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. We have a quorum. I'll start with call up S 1271, the Fend-off Fentanyl Act. First, I'd like to call up amendment number 1 offered by Ranking Member Scott and me. It's an amendment in the nature of a substitute to S 1271, making technical changes to the bill. I turn to Senator Scott. Any additional comments? Okay. I ask the Brown-Scott amendment number 1, the substitute amendment, be adopted and considered as original text for purposes of further amendment. Any objections? Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. The amendment's adopted and is so modified. Any member wish to offer amendments? I'm sorry, I will call up amendment number 2 as modified, a manager's amendment offered by Ranking Member Scott and me. This amendment concludes Menendez number 6 is modified, Daines number 9 is modified. These amendments will be included in this amendment in block. The question is on amendment number 2 is modified. Is there objection? Objection heard. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Nay? Nay. Okay, the ayes have it. Would any member like to be recognized to discuss the amendment on Fend?
Chairman.
Senator Daines?
First, thanks for presenting this legislation for Markup. The fact it has 60 co-sponsors, including myself, I think speaks not only about the legislation, but about the drug crisis facing this nation. I'm concerned about this administration's track record of using general licenses to gut the effectiveness of sanctions regimes that are authorized by Congress. One of the most egregious examples we've seen is General License 8, which has effectively nullified energy sanctions imposed on Russia for invading Ukraine. Because I believe in the pursuit of this legislation, the need to stem the fentanyl crisis in this country, I draft Amendment 9, which would have required Senate approval for any general license used for exemptions. I appreciate working with the chair, as well as Ranking Member Scott, on Amendment 2, which provides a pathway to creating transparency as to how and why certain entities receive exemptions and why others don't. I think this language strengthens the legislation. I appreciate the work of this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And you are not offering your amendment, correct? Okay. My understanding is Senator Warnock has an amendment he would like to discuss or offer. Senator Warnock, Senator from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to call up my amendment, Warnock 12. And thank you for your work on this critical legislation. I agree that we must address the opioid epidemic. That is clear. It's claimed thousands of lives in Georgia and all across the country. However, we have lived with the war on drugs for decades. Rather than reduce illegal drugs in our communities, we've actually declared war on many of our communities themselves. I've seen the impact of this up close as a pastor, as a member of the community. The United States of America, the land of the free, as a result of this misguided approach, is the mass incarceration capital of the world. And it stems in large part from our failed war on drugs. It's been a war on these communities. And so while I believe that we must fund law enforcement, which is at the front lines of illegal trafficking, I also believe that we must fund treatment, recovery, and diversion programs for those suffering from substance use disorder. And that's why I'm offering a simple amendment that would broaden the permissible uses for any forfeited funds to include funding for the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administrations. It doesn't remove any eligibility for law enforcement, but by expanding the uses of this funding, it allows the federal government to take a more holistic approach to this problem. And it would allow the funds to curtail the demands for drugs and work to mitigate the damage caused by opioids to our communities. While I understand this amendment is outside the scope of the Banking Committee's jurisdiction, today I will vote to advance this bill with the hope that the chair and the ranking member will commit to working with me to address this important issue for our communities as this bill progresses to the floor. With great concern for these issues, which I'm committed to continuing to work on, and hopefully the chair and the ranking member will work with me, I will withdraw my amendment. Thank you, Chair. I yield back.
Thanks, Senator Warnock. As you and I have discussed privately, and I, of course, will work with you on that. I wholeheartedly agree with the comments you made. We must look at funding additional programs to address substance abuse treatment and prevention. I look forward to engaging in additional outreach to other committees of jurisdiction on this specific proposal. Senator Scott?
Thank you.
Hey, Senator Scott, for comments? No? Okay, got it. Thank you, Senator Warnock. Any other amendment? Any other member have an amendment? Unless any member wishes to offer additional amendments, I now move that the committee favorably report S-1271, the Fend-off Fentanyl Act as amended. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Tester. Mr. Warner.
Aye. I'm sorry.
Ms. Warren. Mr. Van Hollen. Ms. Cortez Masto.
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Smith. Ms. Cinema.
Aye.
Mr. Austin. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I lost my place.
He thinks of you now.
Mr. Warnock.
Aye.
Mr. Fetterman.
He also thinks
Aye.
he's awesome. Because also he's on the committee.
Mr. Scott.
You two also look very much alike.
Mr. Crapo. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Haggerty.
Aye.
Ms. Lummis. Mr. Vance. Ms. Britt. Mr. Kramer.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Daines.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the vote is 12 in favor, 11 against.
No. 23.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, the vote is unanimous. I apologize.
I know you're used to seeing things 12-11, right? 23 ayes, no nays. The ayes obviously have it. With this vote, this bill as amended is hereby ordered favorably reported to the full Senate. I ask unanimous consent the staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes that the court and rule be waived. Hearing no objection, it's so ordered. I will now consider the Recoup Act. I'll call up amendment number 2, a manager's amendment offered by Ranking Member Scott and me. This amendment includes Brown number 3, Scott number 4 is modified, Lummis Smith number 5, Vance number 9 is modified, Kennedy number 14 is modified, Reed number 17 is modified, Tillis number 34 is modified, Cinema, Tillis, Lummis number 36 is modified. These amendments will be rolled up into amendment number 2 in block. Senator Scott, would you like to comment? No. With that, the question is on amendment number 2 is modified. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. Would any member like to be recognized to discuss an amendment to Recoup?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Senator. Senator Tillis.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if I'm in order to go ahead and move forward with an amendment or offer an amendment.
If you have an amendment, certainly.
Well, the bad news is I'm going to talk. The good news is I'm going to withdraw 31 through 33. 34 was incorporated in the manager's amendment. You know, I felt very strongly when we had the oversight hearings on Silicon Valley Bank that the fact patterns that led up to that and the management malpractice we need to have some accountability. And I do believe that we have to work in that direction. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I also think in that same series of hearings, we heard about all the supervisory failures. We seem to be forgetting about I think the two main instances are the two main factors that led to it: management malpractice and supervisory malpractice. We need to get to that, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to offer amendments to give us more transparency with the Fed. It's why I also supported the Financial Regulators Transparency Act of 2023, which was really the basis for the amendments that I've offered and will withdraw. But on the subject of the bill, I still feel like there's a lot of work to be done. There are some amendments from my colleagues that I'm going to support, because I still think it's too expansive, and we're not making the distinction between management malpractice, bad management decisions, and management malpractice. And if we're not careful here, you're going to stifle innovation. You're going to provide reasons for people to pursue a position other than the C-suite that may have good ideas that just fail. That's not malpractice. That's just a management decision that didn't bear out. I think this bill is too expansive. I think it has been refined substantially since the first version that I saw, but we still have a lot more work to do. And so, Mr. Chair, like I said, the good news is I will be withdrawing my amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Senator Sinema is recognized from Arizona.
Thank you. I just want to say a huge thank you to both the chairman and the ranking member for the work they've done on this piece of legislation. I'm very pleased that the Sinema-Lummis-Tillis amendment was included in the manager's package. Our amendment seeks to hold the Federal Reserve accountable for the cultural and operational changes that are needed in order for it to be successful in the future. But at a larger level, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Scott, today's bipartisan success is an example of what happens when people with different viewpoints are willing to talk with each other, hear one another, and find the common ground. I know it wasn't easy to get to this compromise, but it is the work that the American people have asked us to do. So I want to commend you and your teams for the strong leadership on the important issues on both the bills today, and I'm really looking forward to more markups like this one. Thank you. I yield
Thanks,
back.
Senator Sinema. Anyone else? Senator Vance of Ohio is recognized.
Mr. Chair, I want to thank you and the ranking member for your work on this, and just make a note about the amendment that you guys included in the manager's package, for which I'm grateful. We have a problem in this country, and the problem is that a banking system that I think has largely worked pretty well for a lot of small businesses, the mid-tier banking system that has, the three-tier banking system, I should say, where you have the big banks, of course, you have a lot of regional banks that do important financial services, but you also have community banks that do a lot of lending services that nobody else is willing to do. That system is under threat, and you can see it in the numbers of deposits that are migrating to the big banks, and you see it in a lot of other ways as well. One of the things I'm very worried about, of course, is that the regulatory burden of our financial system falls heaviest on the small and mid-sized banks. And the amendment that we proposed effectively would mean that if the FDIC takes a bank into receivership, we only allow a massive bank to buy the failed bank's assets unless there's no other alternative and there's no other buyer on the table. One of the things that we learned from the SVB crisis and much of the fallout is that the big banks have a lower cost of capital. They're able to absorb these things. But if that leads to concentration, and if we don't do anything to stop it, we're going to wake up in a country that has 3 or 4 massive banks and no small and regional banks for our financial system. That's a disaster for our country. It's a disaster for our small businesses and our consumers. And I think that we should do more, not just this amendment, we should do more to try to preserve the regional banking system in our country. I think it's good for our people. It's good for our country. And we don't want to be like Europe, where they just have 2 or 3 massive national banks and no other alternatives for their consumers.
Thank you, Senator Vance. Senator Reed of Rhode Island is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me commend you and Senator Scott for the outstanding work you and your staffs did. this is an important piece of legislation. I had an amendment number 18 that would have broadened the clawback, not just for inside directors, i.e. those that have a position within the bank of management, but all directors. It turns out that Silicon Valley Bank had 11 directors. 1 was an inside director and 10 were not. I think we can work going forward to see if we could improve that situation, because without every director on the board being sensitive to the issues of management and understanding responsibilities and liabilities, I don't think we're going to be as successful as possible. I thank you for including my Amendment 17, and I certainly will not ask for a vote on 18. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Reed, and I thank you for the legislation that you and Senator Grassley introduced that would help to launch this discussion, similar to the legislation that Senator Warren and Cortez Masto and Vance and Britt introduced to get this discussion front and center. Senator Smith, I think, has comments. Oh, somebody on your side too. Okay, Senator Haggerty is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member. One of the most, Thank you. One of the most critical elements of competitive advantage that we enjoy as a nation is the strength and depth of our capital markets. I want to do everything I can to make certain that we retain that competitive advantage, in fact, strengthen it. I'm all for accountability, but I also want to make certain that we're doing everything we can to ensure supervisory competence. What we've seen in the wake of Silicon Valley Bank's collapse of Signature is a real question in terms of the competence and the dereliction of duty, in my view, of some of our supervisors and people that ran an auction with the FDIC. We need to create a regulatory environment that does not introduce more uncertainty into the U.S. economy, one that creates greater certainty. And we need to have legislation and ensuing regulations that also support our competitiveness and our ability to attract and retain the greatest talent we can possibly get in this arena. Therefore, I'd like to offer and also withdraw my amendments Haggerty 21, 22, and 23 for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Haggerty. Senator Smith's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member. I want to just add my thanks to both of you and your staff for the great work in putting these two pieces of bipartisan legislation together. And I also want to thank Senator Warren and others in a bipartisan way for the work that that you did, again, in a bipartisan way to lift up this issue of greater corporate accountability. I want to also thank Senator Lummis for working on the amendment that we worked on together that's included in the manager's package. The public reports issued by the Fed and the FDIC following the failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank provided a really valuable insight into the circumstances that led to their collapse. These included candid assessments of regulatory deficiencies and supervisory shortcomings of the regulators themselves. So public reports like these will not only increase transparency and trust, but they will help allow us to make informed decisions about how to prevent future crises. So I thank you very much for including this amendment in the manager's package.
Thank you, Senator Smith. Senator Lummis is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to add my thanks to you and Senator Scott for your bipartisan work on this. A lot of the amendments that are being offered and withdrawn could be the subject of another bill in the future. Because a lot of good ideas have been brought to the table and withdrawn today in the interests of comity that has brought this committee to its first markup since I've been on it. I too will be offering and withdrawing Lummis Amendment 7. While the FDIC is responsible for the orderly resolution of failing banks, it's not the primary regulator for most of the institutions with assets over $10 billion that are subject to this bill. In many cases, the FDIC steps in as the resolution authority with little to no prior interaction with the management of a failing financial institution. State banking regulators, the Federal Reserve, and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency are often the most familiar with the management of an institution, the culture of the institution, and how responsive management's been to supervisors' concerns in the lead up to a failure. So that the FDIC has the advantage of this perspective, this amendment would require the FDIC to consult with the appropriate federal or state banking supervisor prior to clawing back compensation. And the consultation period, I suggest, is limited to 14 days. I believe in transparency. I agree with other members who have suggested that having the regulators deeply involved in these decisions actually will make for better decisions. I will not be offering this amendment because of the agreement that has been reached by this committee, and I again want to thank the chairman and the ranking member for bringing this bill to a vote today. I withdraw.
Thank you, Senator Lummis. Senator Warren of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by saying I'm glad that this committee passed the Fend-off Fentanyl Act. But if we want to have a real impact on fentanyl trafficking, we also need to cut off the money supply. We were in a hearing a couple of weeks ago in which we heard about 90 Chinese companies that are sending the precursor drugs to Mexico, where they're mixed up then into fentanyl and shipped around the world and to the United States. To be effective in the fight against this, then we need to deal with the crypto payments that have become the payment of choice for these drug traffickers. This is what our law enforcement and national security experts agree, that crypto is becoming the payment of choice, and this committee needs to deal with better money laundering rules for crypto. But let me return to the Recoup Act. Today, this committee takes up legislation to hold bank executives accountable when they blow up their banks. And I am particularly grateful to Chair Brown for his leadership on this issue. As chair of this committee, it is clear that he is committed to fundamental fairness and to a banking system that doesn't just work for the wealthy and well-connected, but that works for every American. Since March, our financial system has experienced the second, third, and fourth largest bank collapses in American history. Our current laws reward executives like the ones from First Republic and SVB and Signature who placed risky bets with customers' money, boosted short-term profits, scooped up huge bonuses and salaries, and walked away rich when their banks exploded and threatened the stability of the entire banking system. When SVB Bank failed in March, both Republicans and Democrats came together to introduce the Failed Bank Executives Clawback Act. I want to offer special thanks to my early bipartisan partners, Catherine Cortez Masto, Josh Hawley, and Mike Braun, who helped draft that first bill. Our bill won substantial bipartisan support. 11 of us, both Republican and Democratic members of the Banking Committee, then reworked the bill and joined in. I want to thank J.D. Vance and Katie Britt and Kevin Kramer for their careful work in getting the details right and helping build a larger bipartisan coalition. When drafting that bill, I felt, as I do now, that legislation to claw back multi-million-dollar compensation from failed bank executives needs to be ironclad, tough enough to cover every bad actor, tough enough so that all types of payouts that they collected while running a bank are covered, and making sure that the multiple years of bad behavior that add up to catastrophic bank failures are also covered. It is critically important that our bank rules are also tough enough to withstand pressure from an army of bank lobbyists and financial industry lawyers who fight to weaken every regulation and create exceptions to every effort to hold banks and bank executives accountable. There is more that we need to do, much more, but the Recoup Act is a reasonable compromise that significantly improves the oversight of bank executives. It will help make the banking system safer for all Americans, and every member of Congress in both the Senate and the House should support it. I am proud that this committee has answered President Biden's call for greater accountability, and I hope we can get this done quickly.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Get that back up for me. Mr. Chairman, with respect to the to the banking bill. I have two amendments. I'm going to withdraw both of them and hope that you and our ranking member will continue to work with us to try to make this bill better. My first amendment, which I would like us all to consider as this bill moves to the floor, is to index the $10 billion community bank threshold to inflation. This bill does not impact community banks. Community banks are defined as being $10 billion or less. I would like to index that to inflation. The second amendment, which I know has a germaneness issue, which I think can be worked through, I can best demonstrate with an example. If I'm an insider at an American company and I sell my stock, I've got to notify the SEC within 2 days, and I've got to do it electronically. And almost all insiders do it in 1 day, and it is immediately posted so the world can know on their website. If I'm an insider at a foreign corporation listed on an American exchange, I don't have to do that. If I make a trade as an insider of a foreign corporation, I've got 30 days, and I don't have to do it electronically. I can mail it in, and it's never, ever posted. Why does this matter? Because there are trades by insiders in a global economy of foreign corporations' shares listed on American exchanges every day that people don't know about. I'll give you an example. You remember the issue with Ant Group. Alibaba is an affiliate of Ant Group. Ant Group wanted to go public. Everybody knew that if Ant Group went public, the price would go through the roof, and so would the price of Alibaba. There's just one problem. President Xi Jinping got mad at the head of Alibaba, and he told the Ant Group, the affiliate of Alibaba, that they couldn't go public. Well, the day before the announcement was made by China that they weren't going to let Alibaba go public, an insider at Alibaba sold $150 million worth of Alibaba stock. And of course, as soon as the announcement was made that Ant couldn't go public, the value of Alibaba went through the floor. And other shareholders never knew about it. Now, my amendment would just say foreign insiders have to abide by the same rules as domestic insiders if you want to list on an American exchange. And I would be grateful, Mr. Chairman, and send you a fruit basket if you would commit to work with me. I'll even throw in a personal pan pizza. And if you would commit to work with me, you and the ranking member, to get these amendments on. Dominoes.
Senator Warnock just asked me to work with him. I said yes. I don't think we can be this transactional in this committee. So if you'd only ask me in a nice way without offering anything, Senator Kennedy. Thank you. Anybody on this side? Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to second the request from Senator Kennedy on the Second Amendment. We teamed up on earlier legislation called Holding Foreign Companies Accountable, which passed the Congress. It's law, which ensures that foreign companies play by the same accounting rules that American and other companies apply when they're listed on the exchanges. This is the sequel to it. Glad to partner with Senator Kennedy on it again, and I really do think it's likely to have very strong, if not overwhelming, bipartisan support to move it forward. And let me just take this opportunity to add my word of thanks to you and the ranking member for working out this legislation to hold executives, bank executives accountable when their own negligence contributes to the collapse of banks and leaves public entities like the FDIC having to hold the bag. That's wrong, and I know that that's a bipartisan view of this committee is reflected in this legislation, indicates that. So thank you and the ranking member.
Thanks, Senator Daines is recognized.
Chairman, thank you. To be clear, I'm not offering a fruit basket or a pizza this morning, but I would like to
That
call
was
up.
personal pan pizza.
Let the record state it's a personal pan pizza. But I would like to call up Daines Amendment 35, which would require annual testimony of this committee on the CDFI fund. The problem with bureaucracies is there's nothing compassionate about a bureaucracy. There's typically nothing efficient about a bureaucracy, particularly a federal government bureaucracy where there are no competitive forces, where they're rather captive audience, captive customers, the taxpayers, to find recourse because they can't go anywhere else but to the Treasury Department regarding CDFI funds. I support CDFIs. Thanks to this fund, we've seen a lot of great investments made across this country for businesses, nonprofits as well. But I'm hearing frequently about the lack of responsiveness, lack of transparency within the program for key stakeholders. The fund has been in a blackout period since October. There's no clear date when they're going to accept any new applications. In fact, for some institutions, they've had to wait as long as 18 months to get a decision on their application. In an environment of volatile interest rates, this is unacceptable. Treasury needs to provide greater transparency, just communicate. We are the recourse to hold these bureaucracies accountable. So that said, I'm not going to be pushing for a vote at this time. I'll be withdrawing my amendment, but I want to bring this to the attention of this committee as well as Treasury.
Thank you, Senator Daines. We don't debate on with withdrawn amendments, but I know Senator Warner just wanted.
I just want to very briefly, there's a broad bipartisan group on this committee that is working on CDFIs. I think this is a piece of the financial sector that needs more attention. I really appreciate Senator Daines' amendment and look forward to working with him on that on a different time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else have amendments or comments?
Just a quick comment.
Briefly from both of you and the guy next to you.
I just have a letter that's trying to better describe the difference between management malpractice and a bad management or a decision that ended up with a bad result from the Bank Policy Institute. I'd like to submit for the record.
Without objection.
And, Mr. Chair, the last thing is just I talked to my staff this morning before the meeting. I said, did you have a late night? He said, not near as late as the committee staff. So in addition to thanking you all for your leadership on improving the bill, I want to thank the committee staff. I suspect they'll sleep well tonight, and they're great to work with.
Thank you, and I concur with that. They had late nights and early mornings both, and I said something to my staff today, but tomorrow is Chair Powell's testimony, so the good night's sleep will probably be Thursday night for them without getting anybody's personal lives. Tanya, Shauna, and Laura, and Alicia, and all of you. Senator Kennedy, briefly.
Mr. Chairman, Raphael made some comments which I thought were very appropriate about fentanyl users, but I wanted to point out to the committee with respect to fentanyl dealers, in federal court, to get a 5-year minimum sentence as a dealer, you have to have 40 grams of fentanyl. That's enough to kill everybody about 100 times in this room. To get a 5-year minimum as a dealer for crack, you only need 28 grams. For LSD, 1 gram. For meth, 5 grams. So we've got it backwards. The most lethal drug requires the most quantity to be treated as a dealer. And I suggest at some point we're going to need to address that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Scott would like to say a few words before we bring the bill up for a vote.
Just wanted to thank my committee members, Chairman as well, for the hard work on this legislation, number one. Number two, obviously, if you're listening at all, you hear that the work that we need to get accomplished isn't done yet. There are a number of amendments that have been withdrawn, and I thank my fellow colleagues for engaging in such an important and deliberative process to get to a place where we have legislation that is focused on the bank execs who are responsible and the chairman of the board, as well as bringing light to the supervisory process and the failures that we've seen within the supervisors as relates to SVB and Signature Bank. I think it's incredibly important for us to have legislation that is not expansive, that frankly does focus on the board, the chairman of the board, and the 5 members of the executive team. And this is specifically the compensation clawbacks are specific to those banks that have failed. I think it's really important for us to note that as I read the letter that is being submitted here today, the compensation clawbacks are specifically for failed banks and not for anyone else. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Scott. I now move the committee favorably report the original measure of the recovering executive compensation obtained from unaccountable practices. The Recoup Act is amended. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Menendez. Aye. Mr. Tester. Aye. Mr. Warner. Aye. Ms. Warren.
Aye.
Mr. Van Hollen. Aye. Ms. Cortez Masto. Ms. Smith.
Aye by proxy.
Ms. Sinema. Mr. Warnock.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Fetterman.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Crapo. Aye. Mr. Rounds. Aye. Mr. Tillis.
No.
Mr. Kennedy.
Aye.
Mr. Haggerty.
No.
Ms. Lummis.
Aye.
Mr. Vance. Mrs. Britt. Mr. Kramer.
Aye by proxy.
Mr. Daines. Mr. Chairman, the vote is 21-2.
The ayes have it. With this vote, the bill as amended is hereby ordered favorably reported to the full Senate. I ask unanimous consent, staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes and the Gordon rule be waived. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Again, I thank all of you for your hard work. Staff, principally, members of this committee and both parties will now briefly pause so that our witnesses for today's Federal Reserve nomination hearing can make their way to the table. Thank you all. Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee is back in session. Committee meets today to consider 3 nominations to the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. The Honorable Philip Jefferson to be Vice Chair, the Honorable Lisa Cook to be a member, the Honorable Adriana Kugler to be a member. We thank the nominees for appearing here today, for their willingness to serve. We also thank them for wading through what seemed like interminable markup sessions, so thank you for your patience. The economy is in a different place from where it was at this time last year. Back then, Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine devastated global energy markets, driving up the cost of gas. The national average price of gas topped $5 a gallon. Global supply chain disruptions resulted in shortages of key goods, increasing costs on American families. Inflation, we know, hit a peak of 9.1%. Today, inflation's at 4%, short of the Fed's target, of course, of 2%, but a steady improvement from the 9% last year. Global supply chains have begun to stabilize, product shortages have eased, ports are less congested, the price of gas has fallen, domestic energy production has increased. The unemployment rate is under 4%, strongest labor market for American workers in decades. Thanks for the work that 2 of you have done on the Fed to help that happen, and the administration's work especially. The country added 339,000 jobs in May. Think of that, bringing the total number of jobs created since the Democrats were in the majority, since I've been chair of this committee, to 13 million new jobs. In April, the black unemployment rate hit 4.7%, the lowest in 50 years. In May, the unemployment rate for Latinos dropped. The economy is trending in the right direction. We must build on that success, work to solve the persistent problems that have held back American workers for decades, regardless of the economic trends. At this important time in our economic recovery, we need all 7 Federal Reserve governors working to grow an economy with low prices and plentiful job opportunities, to uphold, as I've talked to all 3 of you individually about, some longer than others, to uphold the Fed's dual mandate of promoting stable prices and maximum employment. We're fortunate to have 3 exceptionally qualified nominees before the committee today. I will speak about them in a moment. Go to you, and then I want Senator Menendez to introduce one of the people on the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your willingness to serve our nation in your very important roles that we have the responsibility and constitutional responsibility to vet and talk about. Mr. Jefferson, thank you for your willingness, Governor, to continue to support the philosophy that I think is really embedded in the American culture, that the free market system is the marvel of the world, and one that requires us to continue to focus our attention on how do we improve it based on the current philosophy and the mandate of the Fed. And I thank you for your willingness to do so. Before us today, however, are 3 noms, not just 1, who are asking us to confirm them to serve the American people through their government-appointed positions. But 2 of these noms seem more interested in having government serve their personal ideologies and their political priorities. Unlike the famous words, and I paraphrase, of JFK, ask not what you can do for your country, but rather what the country can do for you. I think Governor Cook and Ms. Kugler both want to use their positions and their influence to influence and immerse their philosophies into the mainstream of American life through these incredibly powerful posts. Examples would include everything from reparations to climate agenda, systemic racism, ESG, and other issues that distract from the actual job of the Fed. Using something like the black unemployment as the way we determine Fed decisions is just as discriminatory as using only the Asian unemployment would be. Very different outcomes, but both very distorting. I think it's important for us to have noms who want to serve the country and not have their positions be leveraged for their ability to weave into our overall philosophy, their ideologies. With that, I return to you.
Thank you, Senator Scott. I introduce, I'll yield my time to Senator Menendez. I want to recognize him for his many years of championing historic representation in our financial system at the highest levels of government. Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and to Ranking Member Scott for an opportunity to say a few words about what I consider a historic hearing. Today we have before us 3 exceptionally qualified nominees to serve on the Federal Reserve: Dr. Jefferson, Dr. Cook, and Dr. Kugler. For a moment, though, I'd like to touch on Dr. Kugler's nomination and the personal significance that it holds for me. In her appearance today, I see the story of my mother, Evangelina Menendez.
70 years ago, my mother convinced my father to leave behind the only life they had ever known in Cuba. They arrived, like so many before them, as immigrants on unfamiliar shores, reaching for the American dream. Every day, my mother worked long hours as a seamstress in a factory, always striving to provide for her 3 children. She is the reason I sit in this chair as a United States Senator. Because of the sacrifices she made as a fierce Latina who loved our country and its promise in the way that only an immigrant can, today Dr. Kugler sits in her chair as a first-generation American as well. What a shining testament to the power of the American dream. Only in America are our stories even possible, which is why for 30 years in Congress I have pushed for greater representation in every industry at every level. To me, creating more stories like ours is part and parcel of creating a more perfect union. Earlier this year, I made the case to the Biden administration that this nomination is a golden opportunity to send a clear and powerful message that the hopes and dreams of Latinos are central to the promise of America. Today, Dr. Kugler makes history as the first person of Latino descent ever nominated to serve on the Federal Reserve. It is a remarkable accomplishment, and I want to recognize all she has done to earn it. And when I say what she has done to earn it, I see no ideology in her views. I see a pragmatism that comes from being an economist. I hear no wokeism. I hear no purpose of promoting a plan or a program or an idea. What I see is a former chief economist at the Department of Labor, who now serves as the U.S. Executive Director at the World Bank. She brings both a domestic and international perspective at a time when the global economy has never been more connected. She's conducted invaluable research on labor markets, unemployment, and productivity, all which are central to the Federal Reserve's dual mandate. And because of her work and her reputation, she has earned the endorsement of 33 of her peer economists from across the political spectrum, who call her, quote, a brilliant, objective economist who takes an evidence-based approach to decision-making and is an expert in policy evaluation, close quote. In short, she's eminently qualified for the position she's been nominated for. And because of her unwavering work ethic, her commitment to public service, and her sterling credentials, we are able to hold today's hearing, which is more than a century in the making. That's right. In the 110-year history of the Federal Reserve, there has never been a member of the Board of Governors who has lived the experience of being Latino in America. Not once. And so today we have an opportunity to take momentous steps and write history in real time. I want to thank Dr. Kugler for her willingness to serve, and I want to thank my colleagues for giving me this opportunity to speak from the heart about what her nomination means for the 62 million Latinos who call American home. Simply put, we see ourselves reflected in this historic nomination. And while she may be the first one of us nominated and hopefully confirmed, we certainly don't expect her to be the last. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Menendez. And Senator Van Hollen from Maryland has a few moments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. Congratulations to all 3 of you on your nominations. Governor Jefferson, thank you for your earlier work at my alma mater, Swarthmore College, as Chair of the Department of Economics. And I just wanted to second the remarks made by Senator Menendez and also add, Dr. Kugler, that we're pleased in Maryland that you're a great resident of our state. You bring us great Maryland pride. So congratulations to all 3 of you, and welcome.
Thank you, Senator Holland. I will do introductions, what's left of those introductions. So I'll start with, we're fortunate to have the 3 exceptionally qualified nominees. Dr. Jefferson's the president's nominee to be vice chair of the Federal Reserve. He confirmed he'd be only the 2nd black man to serve in this role. In 2022, the Senate confirmed Dr. Jefferson in a 91-7 vote. to a 14-year term as a member of the Federal Reserve. He's a recognized expert on the economics of poverty and opportunity. Before joining the Fed, he served as Vice President for Academic Affairs, Dean of Faculty, and Paul Friedland Professor of Economics at Davidson, and as Senator Van Hollen said, also taught chair of the Economics Department at Swarthmore, my daughter's alma mater. Welcome to the committee. The president's renominated Dr. Lisa Cook to a 14-year term on the Board of Governors. Despite a toxic campaign from the far right to discredit her nomination, the Senate has still confirmed Dr. Cook's nomination to the Board of Governors in May of last year. I was proud to help to lead that fight. Like Dr. Jefferson, she is a respected economist with decades of monetary policy experience. Prior to joining the Fed, Dr. Cook served as professor in economics and international relations at Michigan State University, becoming one of the country's leading researchers on international economic growth and innovation economics. She had served as senior economist at the White House, senior advisor at the Department of Treasury, adjunct professor at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Welcome, Dr. Cook. Really glad you're back. And as took over a century to have a black woman governor in the Federal Reserve. She shattered that glass ceiling last year. We're thrilled she wants to serve a full term. We'll also consider an historic nomination of Dr. Kugler. Thank you. I can only endorse the words of Senator Menendez. Dr. Jefferson, proceed. Oh, I'm sorry. We need to swear him in, right? Yeah. Would you please all stand? I apologize. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Do you agree to appear and testify before any duly constituted committee of the Senate? Thank you. Hey, take your seats, Dr. Jefferson. Please begin.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity.
Jefferson, move your microphone a little closer to you, would you please? Thank you.
Is this better? Can you hear me now? Should the green light be on? Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I am honored by President Biden's nomination to serve as Vice Chair of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. If confirmed, I will continue to use my experience and expertise in pursuit of the goals that Congress assigned to the Federal Reserve on behalf of all Americans: maximum employment and price stability. When I spoke to this committee over 16 months ago, I was a PhD economist with an eclectic research background: macroeconomics and monetary economics, poverty and economic inequality, and applied econometrics. I posited then that these varied specializations would provide unique perspectives on the complex issues facing the Fed. 1 year of service as a Fed governor has tested this hypothesis, and I can confirm its accuracy. I have equally learned from and enjoyed the broad range of views around the Federal Open Market Committee table. As a governor, I have focused on the design, implementation, and transmission of monetary policy, served on key committees on monetary affairs, supervision and regulation, and community banks, and chair the Committee on Board Affairs. The Fed's decisions affect all Americans. We consult data, empirical evidence, and research. But fully understanding the U.S. economy means understanding the experiences of those who live and work in it. Since arriving at the Federal Reserve, I've made two-way communication with the public a priority. From meeting with business and community leaders, workers, students, and retirees, to public speeches. Experience shows that achieving our dual mandate fosters an environment characterized by a dynamic labor market, thriving entrepreneurship, sustainable growth, and secure and stable saving and investment. It also provides a critical foundation for monetary policy in challenging times. Our commitment to these goals will ground inflation expectations appropriately so that policy does not encumber private decision-making. Long-run, inclusive prosperity also requires paying careful attention to the financial system's safety and soundness. The economy faces multiple challenges, including inflation, banking sector stress, and political instability. The Federal Reserve must remain attentive to them all. Inflation has started to abate, and I remain focused on returning it to our 2% target. Despite recent stress, the U.S. banking system is sound and resilient, and I remain attuned to any threats to its stability. Before closing, I would like to acknowledge the love and support of my friends and family, many of whom are here behind me, especially my sons, Nathan and Miles. Again, thank you for the opportunity and for your consideration of my nomination. If confirmed as Vice Chair, I look forward to working with each of you and with this committee. I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Jefferson. It was an honor to attend your swearing in, as it was Dr. Cook's swearing in back a while ago. So, Dr. Cook, good to see you here.
Chairman Brown, Ranking Member Scott, and other members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I am humbled and honored to have been renominated by President Biden to serve a full 14-year term on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. In my work as a Federal Reserve Governor, my background and professional experience have proven to be invaluable. I spent my childhood in Milledgeville, Georgia, in the midst of the rural, desegregating South. My dedication to public service was invigorated by observing the courage and resolve of my late parents and other members of my family. We stood alongside friends and neighbors whose names were never recorded, and others like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., whose memories are engraved in our nation's history. After being a Marshall Scholar at Oxford University and earning my PhD in economics at the University of California, Berkeley, I engaged in path-breaking analytical and empirical research on economic growth, innovation, and financial institutions while on the faculty of Harvard University and Michigan State University, and as a national fellow at the Hoover Institution. My professional colleagues elected me to help lead the field as a member of the Executive Committee of the American Economic Association, and I was selected as a research associate of the National Bureau of Economic Research. In addition, I have gained valuable experience from my work at the U.S. Department of Treasury and the President's Council of Economic Advisors. I have significant experience in banking and finance, as is evidenced by my service on the board of directors of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and of a community development financial institution in Michigan, in addition to my employment at an investment bank and a large commercial bank. Indeed, community banks and other local financial institutions elected me as a director of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. When I appeared before you last spring, I pledged to protect the independence of the Federal Reserve. Over the past 13 months, I have been unwavering in my dedication to ensuring that our decisions serve the American people rather than any political or special interest. As a policymaker, I am committed to following a data-driven approach. My analysis draws extensively on high-frequency data and cutting-edge methodologies. This approach is especially important in a context where the pitfalls of relying on traditional analytical methods has been quite evident. I am acutely aware that the Federal Reserve's policy actions affect the daily lives of all Americans. The economy can only thrive when everyone can take part and contribute. Therefore, I consistently strive to engage directly with business and community leaders, workers, entrepreneurs, students and retirees, and other Americans. Listening to their experiences and perspectives where they are from Grand Rapids to Oakland to Spartanburg to Detroit to New Orleans, has been critical for informing my own policy decisions. I am committed to promoting sustained economic growth in a context of low and stable inflation. A strong economy contributes to broad-based prosperity by bringing people off the sidelines and providing opportunities to develop key job market skills. As I stated to this committee last year, elevated inflation is a grave threat to sustaining the expansion of the American economy. Therefore, in my role as a voting member of the Federal Open Market Committee, I've been consistently supportive of our rapid and forceful actions to tighten monetary policy and bring inflation down. If confirmed, I will stay focused on inflation until our job is done. The American economy is at a critical juncture, and it will be essential for the FOMC to act as needed to bring inflation back to our 2% inflation target. Senators, it has been a great honor to serve the American people. As public servants, we vow to work on behalf of all Americans. I'm grateful for your time and attention today and for your consideration of my nomination. If confirmed, I look forward to continuing to work with you in this important role. Before concluding, I would like to express my gratitude to all of my family members, especially those here today, my Aunt Wivona Maury Ward and my sisters Melanie and Pamela Cook, for their steadfast love, encouragement, prayers, and support over many years. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Dr. Cooley, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Brown and Ranking Member Scott. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Senator Menendez and Senator Van Hollen for their generous introductions. It is truly a privilege to have been nominated by President Biden to be a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System. I am honored for the opportunity to appear before you today. With me today are my husband of 29 years, Ignacio Donoso, and my daughter Miri. My son Danny is watching from New York. I am also tremendously grateful to introduce my parents, Bernardo and Nelly, who have sacrificed so much to support me over the years. As a first-generation American and daughter of Colombian immigrants, I am fortunate to have lived the American dream after having seen poverty and adversity. I have had educational and economic opportunities that my parents and grandparents would have never had, and I have benefited from social mobility that is only possible in our dynamic U.S. economy. My maternal grandfather had to leave high school to help his widowed mother raise his 5 siblings, and my maternal grandmother was orphaned at the age of 3 in Colombia. My paternal grandparents fled religious persecution and had to restart their lives on a new continent. My parents worked hard every day to ensure I had every available opportunity to succeed. My family has instilled in me the importance of resilience and an unwavering work ethic, and the value of giving back to those less fortunate than you. I attended public high school in Maryland, earned a bachelor's degree at McGill University, and completed a PhD in economics at UC Berkeley. My areas of specialization are applied econometrics and labor economics. Over the course of my 25-year career, I have produced original research and evidence-based policy analysis on labor markets, unemployment, worker mobility, and firm productivity, all topics that inform the Federal Reserve's important work. If confirmed, my extensive experience analyzing U.S. economic data will be critical in fulfilling my duties at the Federal Reserve and in making well-informed monetary policy decisions. The Federal Reserve's dual mandate to promote stable prices and maximum employment remains fundamental. And as we have seen in recent months, the role of the Federal Reserve in fostering the safety and soundness of banks and resilience of the financial system remains as critical as ever. If confirmed, I am deeply committed to setting monetary policy to reduce inflation and promote maximum employment and to foster the resilience of the financial sector to support job creation and economic growth. My personal and professional experience guides my understanding that high inflation hurts workers and businesses alike. And I believe that it is important to bring inflation down to the Fed's 2% target. This will allow and give us a strong foundation to build an economy that supports all Americans. If confirmed, I look forward to upholding the Federal Reserve's independence, making decisions in collaboration with my colleagues and based on the best data and analysis. As chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor, I worked on issues related to job growth, unemployment, and workforce development following the Great Recession. In my current role as U.S. Executive Director at the World Bank, I have worked to provide a strategic direction as the world grapples with multiple crises, including the recovery from the pandemic, high inflation around the globe, and the economic spillovers of Russia's war on Ukraine. I have also served in a number of leadership roles during the course of my career, including as Vice Provost at Georgetown University. In those roles, I have always placed the highest priority on being a reasoned voice, grounded in evidence, and working to advance organizational goals. If confirmed, I intend to bring the same balanced and cooperative leadership approach to the Board of Governors. Thank you again for the opportunity to come before you today. I would be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Kugler. So as not to show favoritism to any of these three outstanding nominees, I have one question for each of you, and please be as brief as you can so we can keep that within the 5 minutes. Governor Jefferson, left to right, we've seen three major bank failures in the last 4 months. As Vice Chair Barr noted, these three banks failed, quote, following substantial deposit overflows over poor management of interest rate risk and liquidity risk. The rapid collapse of these banks brings into focus issues of financial stability and lurking risks to our financial system. My question, Mr. Jefferson, Dr. Jefferson, what risks are you closely monitoring? How should we think about those risks in the economy more broadly?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. You're correct. Recently, we did experience a period of banking stress. As I look ahead to the economic outlook for the third and fourth quarter, I am monitoring very carefully the possibility of additional tightening from the banking sector with respect to credit. It represents a downside risk for the economy, and I'm watching that very carefully. With respect to financial stability concerns, as you mentioned, liquidity risk is something that certainly we would want to monitor along with banks' provision of interest rate risk. So these are factors that we must continue to monitor, along with the rapid potential flight of deposits in banks that have a structure where they depend on a large share of uninsured deposits. In addition to that, I'm also looking at quite carefully weakness in the commercial real estate sector. As the pandemic has had an adverse impact on that sector, it's certainly the case that loans that are based in commercial real estate are subject to additional risk. And finally, Senator, there's cybersecurity, always something that must be monitored so that our financial system is robust to potential bad actors who could compromise our financial system.
Thank you, Governor Jefferson. Governor Cook, your thoughts on the state of the economy. 11 straight month, inflation fell, now registering at 4%. The Fed paused rate hikes this month, as you know. Prior to pursuing rate hikes, they'd raised benchmark interest rates 10 times since March of 22. How do you view the state of the economy? Are there key economic indicators that give you hope that the Fed's taking the right steps necessary to get inflation down to its target 2% number?
Thank you for your question, Senator. Is it on?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for your question. We are committed to getting inflation back down to the Fed's 2% inflation target. The inflation rate peaked in 2022 and is coming down, but we are not there yet. It's not back to its 2% target. With respect to risk associated with inflation, there are several, including global commodity prices, the resurgence of global commodity prices, and supply disruptions. Those were huge, and intensification of Russia's aggression in Ukraine. These were factors that were prevalent during this pandemic-related economy. On the front of economic growth, certainly there's a risk that economic growth could slow. Interest rate hikes work to tighten financial conditions and therefore to limit aggregate demand, to bring supply and demand into better balance. That's where the inflation is coming from. So there is a risk there. But certainly, we hope that no slowdown, that if there's an economic activity slowdown, that there is not one that leads to a recession.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Dr. Kugler, you're an expert in labor economics. You've conducted extensive research and analysis into labor markets, examining how training programs help young workers maximize their God-given potential. That we are working the Obama administration, chief economist, Department of Labor, serving as the executive director of the World Bank. All those things make you immensely qualified for this. Share with us how your experiences have shaped, and when we talked in my office, I know we didn't get to some of your background and I wanted to explore, but tell us how your experiences have shaped your view of monetary policy, particularly in light of the Fed's dual mandate.
Thank you very much for that question, Chairman Brown. I would say both my personal and professional experiences have shaped my view of the dual mandate, of the need to bring down inflation and the need to keep maximum employment. I spent my childhood in Colombia, where in the late 1970s and early 80s, inflation was very high, hovering about 25%. This is something that you saw and felt in everyday life when you went to the grocery store, when you went to buy anything, and you had to make decisions as to what to buy or what not to buy. In that context too, unemployment and precarious employment were very evident, and it showed how that could get you into poverty. The lack of employment and the precarious employment left many homeless. That was a reality back in Colombia, my parents' home country. So this drove me to study economics, and this certainly drove my interest in economics. And I ended up in my PhD program at a top program in the country to study macroeconomics, to specialize in macroeconomics and labor economics. Those were my specialties. During that time, I was lucky enough that the Federal Reserve gave me a fellowship as a graduate student. I was a visiting scholar at the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, where I spent time and I had an office in the research and statistics department. Now, I have had a 25-year career, as you mentioned, Senator, where I have studied, I have produced original research, but I have also done a tremendous amount of policy analysis, looking at labor markets and also firm productivity. Both of these areas of research clearly inform the employment side of the dual mandate, as well as the price side and the stability of prices that the Congress has asked the Fed to fulfill. I truly believe that both sides of the mandate are very important. And one side of the mandate may become more important at some points, and the other side of the mandate may become more important at other times. Right now, the inflation side is critical. It is very important to continue to bring down inflation to its 2% target. I'm committed to that. I believe firmly that those that are hurt the most by high inflation, but also by high unemployment, are always the most vulnerable. I have seen it with my own eyes, both when I was growing up in Colombia, but also here in our great US economy. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kugler. Senator Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Questions for both Governors Jefferson and Cook on the diversity of our financial institution. Competition is the bedrock of the American experiment, and the diversity of our banking system has been a core tenet of the prosperity that our nation has experienced. Today, we have about 4,000 banks, a figure that has been on the decline for the last couple decades. While it is important to recognize that large financial institutions serve a valuable purpose, we must also ensure that small financial institutions are allowed to prosper and persevere to serve their communities. I'm a big believer that community banks are where you find that community relationship that allows for folks to have a relationship that lets them get a loan for start a small business or mortgages. That relationship becomes really important. And too often, new regulations increasingly result in compliance burdens, which prevent many of these institutions from being profitable, and they often cannot compete on an even footing with the larger institutions who employ thousands of employees, it seems, just to meet the financial and federal regulations. Given your roles will involve the oversight of all of our nation's banks, how will you commit to ensuring the continued diversity of our financial system, and maybe more pointedly or specifically, the one-size-fits-all, is that your view of how we should regulate our banks, or is a more tailored approach being necessary?
You want to go first? Thank you, Governor. I'm sorry. Thank you, Senator Scott, for your question. And let me affirm the perspective that the diversity of the banking system is really one of the strengths of the American economy. It's very much the case that the role of community banks often is vital for the communities in which they exist because of that personal, what we call relationship banking, which is the key to access for many small businesses who are just starting out. My view with respect to regulation is that regulation should be set at a level that's consistent with the level of risk of the institution, okay? Necessarily, community banks are less complex than the large banking organizations in our economy, and therefore the regulatory burden should be substantially less than what we see in with respect to the large organizations. What we want is confidence in our banking system by depositors and businesses. And so finding the right level of regulation to make sure that our community banks are safe and sound is the key to that confidence, and what will allow them to continue to provide the vital function that, that you have articulated so well. So I do believe in a measured, tailored approach to regulation.
Thank you very much. Governor?
I would agree with Governor Jefferson, and I'd just like to add a few things. I have, like you, I'm very interested in the diversity of the sizes of institutions in the financial system. As you know, I've served on the board of SCDFI, and I was elected by community banks to serve on the board of the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis. So I completely understand relationship banking as you're discussing, and how deeply rooted community banks are in their communities, and how they serve entrepreneurs, businesses, and the people, households in those communities. And I agree with tailoring, that they should not have to be burdened by the same requirements that large banks are. And that they should be able to thrive in these communities without the burden of significant regulation. So I agree with you. There's been a secular decline for 30 years in the number of community banks, and I think it's a serious issue. But I think the diversity of the banking system, the sizes especially, is a strength of the U.S. banking system.
Thank you. Now, running out of time, so I'm going to ask, unfortunately, the two of you one more question as relates to the Governor Barr, or Vice Chair Barr, has indicated that he wants a higher capital standard as it relates to how much capital is kept on the sidelines. I think that may ultimately end up punishing small businesses and the relationship with the banks. So the more capital we require on the sidelines as a result of SVB or Signature Bank, which I think would be a mistake, it leaves fewer dollars to be loaned out. I'd love to hear your perspective on higher capital standards, specifically as it relates to the failures that we've just experienced, which I think is more of a liquidity issue than a capital standard.
Well, as I indicated in my response to Chairman Brown, these liquidity issues and interest rate issues that you mentioned, Senator, were quite significant in the bank stress episode that we experienced in March. Now, with respect to capital requirements, that is something that I know Vice Chair Barr is in the process of evaluating. My personal view is that we want a banking system that is sound and resilient so that banks are able to lend throughout the cycle. So as we think about capital requirements, we are always, or I will always be thinking about that trade-off between making banks more resilient and sound and credit availability. Right? See, we don't want to prohibit the banks from doing their vital role in the economy, which is allocating credit, and they're the ones who assess entrepreneurs to see what businesses they want to fund. And that's a vital role, and we never want to curtail that. So I think we have to deal with, always grapple with, the trade-offs between those two things in setting the right level of capital.
Thank you. Anything you want to add to that, ma'am?
I'll just add that I think about this like an economist would in terms of the objective function. What's the objective? To have more resilience in the financial system. But I'm aware of the constraints as well, the other considerations, and that includes possibly not having enough capital to, enough credit to lend out to businesses. So we take into account holistically both the objective of resilience and the constraints associated with obtaining that resilience. And like you, I am interested in the diversity of the banking system, so that's a strength. I wouldn't want small community banks to be burdened with the regulation that we see for larger institutions. And I think that there are many, as a result of, getting back to your question of SBV, there are proposals that are being developed, and I look forward to seeing those and reviewing those proposals as you put them forward.
Thank you, Governor Cook. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And thank you to all of you for being here. Congratulations. You are all highly qualified nominees, and I thank you for your willingness to continue to serve on the board and to serve on the board. And Dr. Jefferson and Dr. Cook, I was proud to support your nominations last year, and I look forward to doing so again. And Dr. Kugler, I really enjoyed our conversation this last week, and I appreciate the breadth of your expertise and your thoughtful approach to the variety of issues that is within the Fed's purview. And of course, your connection to Minnesota, which I learned about as well when we met. So I look forward to supporting your nomination as well. Dr. Kugler, I wanted to ask you a bit about, I was very impressed by your experience and research that you've done on the intersection between labor markets and public policy. And could you just talk a bit more about that and how that research will inform your work at the Fed?
Thank you, Senator Smith. And thank you very much for taking the time to meet with me last week. I very much enjoyed our conversation and appreciated hearing your views on the economy. I spoke a little bit in response to the question by Senator Brown about my 25-year career generating original research and policy work. And I think that would be critical in informing my views on the dual mandate. I have worked extensively on the employment side of the mandate, but I have also worked on the stable prices side of the mandate. In addition to having done extensive research in understanding dynamics of businesses and worker mobility in the labor market, I have also spent a good amount of time in policy roles. During the Great Recession, I was chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor. And during that time, we spent a lot of time thinking about developing policy proposals to address job creation, to address unemployment, to address workforce development. All of those measures were critical in terms of, on the one, getting people back to work, working on the supply side, getting people back into the labor force and into jobs, but also in terms of trying to help businesses hire new people. So both sides are really very critical. I understand that the labor market has two sides to it. It's the businesses and the workers that are trying to make the best for each other. So that has been part of my work. When I was there, I have to say, I very much took a data-driven approach, an evidence-based driven approach to policy proposals. I truly believe that data is very key in informing decisions and policy decisions. It grounds you on the facts. It grounds you on what is happening in the economy. It informs what the drivers of those new developments in the economy are, and it allows you to identify what works and what doesn't work based on impartial studies and impartial evidence that can tell you where to go next.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to just quickly, if I could, ask. I'll direct this to Dr. Cook and Dr. Jefferson. I am very interested, of course, in the Community Reinvestment Act and the incredible power that this law has to expand and improve access to credit and investment in traditionally disadvantaged and marginalized communities. And we have, the CRA has finally been updated after quite a long time. I'm wondering if you just have any comments that you'd like to make about why it is important to have that updated CRA and where you see us going from here. Dr. Cook.
Thank you for your question, Senator. I definitely believe that the CRA is fundamental to a fair banking system. I sat on the board, as you know, of a CDFI in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and getting credit to the entire economy is something that is a part of the CRA. So getting funding for them is a part of the CRA, a part of the updating, and I look forward to considering it further when the proposals are put out later.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Smith. Senator Vance of Ohio is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate everybody being here, and I appreciate the chairman for holding this important hearing. And I want to start maybe by just pointing out the obvious that one of the important things the Federal Reserve does, of course, is hopefully help us prevent the next global financial crisis. And I want to focus in particular on Ms. Cook, on some of your views here, because I think you've written some things I agree with, and you've written some things that I disagree with too. And so just to start with and to give you some chance to explain your particular perspective here, I understand this is a very complicated question, but at a high level, what do you think caused the 2008 global financial crisis?
I think there were multiple factors causing the 2008 crisis. Certainly, I would say living in Michigan certainly saw the mass layoffs that allowed for people who who had taken out mortgages to no longer be able to make those payments. So that, to me, was one of the primary causes. But certainly extending credit in a way that was not sensible, both receiving credit and extending credit, especially in the subprime sector, helped to cause the global financial crisis.
I appreciate that, Ms. Cook, and I agree with you. And, of course, one thing that I'd add here is that we took, as you said, some primary credit problems and really exploded them by introducing a whole host of highly complex financial instruments. Seems like nobody understood them especially well. That obviously provided a lot of leverage in the economy, and so when $10 disappeared, all of a sudden $1 million disappeared, $10 million disappeared, and on the dominoes went. I want to ask Ms. Cook, if you had to rank it, where would you say a lack of racial and gender diversity ranks on that list? Would you say it's a top 5 factor, a top 10 factor in what caused the global financial crisis? Lack of gender and racial diversity, of course, at the big banks.
Senator, as a Federal Reserve governor, I think about the dual mandate first, and I think about the two legs of that dual mandate, and those are maximum employment and stable prices. And as a governor, I have been engaged with my colleagues on the Federal Open Market Committee in fighting inflation aggressively. And I have been focused on the dual mandate, and that's how, if reconfirmed, I would plan to proceed.
I appreciate that, Ms. Cook, and the reason I asked this question is this. So in a 2019 interview, you said that a lack of women and diversity leads to the next economic crisis. In another speech that year, you suggested a lack of diversity was, quote, at the root of the financial crisis and the Great Recession. So my question is, do you think that a lack of diversity was a root cause of the recent turmoil in the banking sector? Do you think it was a root cause of the 2008 GFC?
Senator, again, I would focus on my time in the past year of being a governor and focusing on the inflation fight. When I have written about diversity in particular, something that you might be interested in, that you focused on, is innovation and where capital goes and where in the country it is. So certainly as a Fed governor, I've been out in all parts of the country listening to community banks and listening to communities about where credit is available and where it is not, and what the Federal Reserve might be able to do to provide such credit in the system, which is part of our dual mandate.
I appreciate that, Ms. Cook, and I will say that I hope you continue that work, because I certainly agree that we need to extend credit where possible and make sure that businesses, whatever the color of the skin of the founder, have access to capital. And I think that's probably an area where there's some alignment between the two of us. The final point that I'd make, and the reason I asked this question, and probably one of the last times I'll ever get to talk to you, and you're likely to be confirmed, is I really worry about how much time we focus on the tasks that we have in a given day. And if we're focused too much on the wrong things, we don't have enough time to focus on the right things. That's certainly true in my job. I think it's true in any other job. My worry is that, especially at the Federal Reserve, which is doing important supervisory work, to the extent that we're focused on diversity, that may distract from our ability to focus on far, far more important things that are at the root of the Federal Reserve's mandate. So I hope whatever your views and whatever your disagreements and agreements with me on that topic, when you're confirmed, as you likely will be, you take the focus on the core function, and I hope that none of us are distracted by some of these other concerns, because I think that's what may lead to the next financial crisis, a lack of supervisory authority from the Federal Reserve. And I think over-focusing on diversity actually enhances and makes that more likely, doesn't make it less likely. Thank you for answering my questions.
Senator Fetterman of Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Cook, hello. Last time you were here, my predecessor was minimized by your credentials and insisted that you were not prepared for this job. Essentially, he made me taking your nomination to make his priority in 2022. Would you agree with that? Tanking your nomination?
Senator, in the year that I have been a governor, Federal Reserve Board governor, I have focused on the dual mandate of maximum employment and stable prices. And I've brought to that both experience and research. Experience in policymaking at the Council of Economic Advisors, at the Treasury, and I have also brought my research to bear.
Thankfully, he failed. Thankfully, he failed, that you're not. And you know, you're abundantly clear and qualified. You have a PhD in economics, correct?
Yes.
You worked for a professor of economics at Michigan State, correct?
Yes.
You served as a senior economist at the Council of Economic Advisors and on a board of a community development financial institution or in Grand Rapids, correct?
Yes.
Now that you've been at that role now for over a year, can you now speak to how your experience prepared for you for this role and for your year on the board for informing your future work?
Thank you for that question, Senator. In particular, I'll just piggyback on the answer that I gave Senator Scott. My time as a member of the board of directors of a CDFI has certainly informed the way I see credit getting into the system and the stability of the financial system and tailoring regulation of the smallest institutions. That's one immediate way that I've seen that. And as a member of the Committee on Smaller Regional Banks and Community Banks, I've leveraged that knowledge to understand how our supervision and regulation affect small and medium-sized institutions. So I think it was critical to have that experience and experience in the financial sector, at an investment bank, at a large commercial bank, with the Federal Home Loan Bank of Indianapolis, where community banks selected me to serve. And certainly my research is clearly focused on the dual mandate, on maximum employment in particular, related to economic growth, productivity, innovation, and I brought that research to bear in addressing these questions in our decisions. Again, thank you for that question, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I'm so grateful that my predecessor was not available, excuse me, not able to stop you being appointed. Dr. Kugler, I believe that it's critical for the Fed aims to create an economy that truly works for working people. Can you please talk about your background, in labor economics and your time at the Department of Labor, which will shape your work for working on the board?
Thank you, Senator Fetterman, and thank you for meeting with me last week. I very much appreciated your time. Let me say that I truly believe that the two sides of the dual mandate, both bringing down inflation and promoting maximum employment, can benefit all Americans and create broad-based prosperity for the entire country. And I think this is critical. I have certainly worked much more on one side of the mandate, the employment side of the mandate. I have deep expertise on labor markets. As U.S. Chief Economist at the Department of Labor, I worked on job creation policies, on policies that try to get people back into work, including workforce development. And I have extensive experience analyzing U.S. economic data, in particular labor market data, data on employment, on wages and prices from the Bureau of Labor Statistics were critical to develop some of these policy proposals because I truly believe in evidence-based policy making. I believe that a data-driven approach can give us a balanced approach towards policy making, and it is critical. In fact, after I left my position as chief economist at the Department of Labor, I was asked by BLS to join the Technical Advisory Committee to help them develop better measures of the CPI that would take into account product substitution, that would take into account changes in the consumer basket so that we could understand at times like we're living through today better where we are in terms of inflation and where we need to go. As U.S. Executive Director at the World Bank, which is a Senate-confirmed position, and I thank Senator Haggerty for having supported me in that role. I have also helped the World Bank grapple with some of the same issues. In fact, inflation around the globe is something that we have seen spread throughout. It's not a U.S. phenomenon, it's an international phenomenon, and it's something that we're seeing even at much higher levels experienced in other countries. I also have engaged on the recovery from the pandemic across the world, which again is the other side of the mandate, right? The mandate that grows economies, that creates jobs. And so I believe I really bring a different perspective, a nuanced understanding of labor data, which is critical to understanding where we are and where the economy is going. And I look forward to continuing to work on both sides of the mandate. But as I indicated before, I think right now, the price stability side of the mandate is very critical, and I am certainly committed to bringing down inflation to the 2% target.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. Thank you, Senator Fetterman, and I concur that your predecessor's inability to stop Dr. Cook's nomination was a very good thing. So, Senator Haggerty is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Jefferson, welcome back. It's good to see you again. If confirmed for this new position, you're going to take over a key monetary policy position at the Federal Reserve. You'll likely be tasked with considering whether the United States government should issue a retail central bank digital currency. Chair Powell has been clear that the Federal Reserve lacks the authority to issue a retail CBDC without congressional authorization. In March, before the House Financial Services Committee, Chair Powell testified that, quote, "It is absolutely the case that Congress will need to authorize the Federal Reserve to issue a CBDC." He's also on record saying that to advance a retail CBDC, the Fed, quote, "would need buy-in from Congress, from the administration, from broad elements of the public." And that again, quote, the Fed would not proceed with the CBDC without support from Congress in the form of an authorizing law. So my first question, Governor, is do you agree with Chair Powell that the Federal Reserve cannot issue a CBDC without authorization from Congress?
I do, Senator.
Thank you.
I do, Senator.
Thank you. Governor, before I continue, I just want to make it clear that I'm going to vehemently oppose any attempt to create a central bank digital currency, whether that's at the Federal Reserve, here at Congress, or in the executive branch. A tool of this nature not only represents an attack on America's sovereignty, it poses an unprecedented threat to our individual liberties. And frankly, I think that any tool like this that the central bank and the Chinese Communist Party in China uses to control its people should be vehemently rejected by the American public. Governor Cook, welcome. As you know, Vice Chair of Supervision Michael Barr will soon release his significant alteration to the bank capital rule structure known as Basel III or Basel Endgame. And as a member of the Federal Reserve's Committee on Financial Stability, have you had an opportunity to review the draft of the new rule? And if so, if you could clarify, what specific weaknesses in our current framework would this new draft address?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Indeed, Vice Chair Barr is conducting a holistic review of capital standards, but we have not I've not received proposals yet to review related to the Basel III endgame.
So for the record, you've not reviewed a draft? You've not seen, this is a 1,000-page proposal. You've not had an opportunity to look at any of this at this point?
Neither the review, which is not yet complete, the holistic review, nor...
I'm talking about the draft that's being put together now.
Right, so I haven't had a chance to review it yet. No, I haven't received it, but I look forward to reviewing it when I receive it. Yes,
it's going to be extensively. If it's a 1,000-page plus rule, it's going to be an extensive proposal. It has very, very broad-ranging ramifications. So I hope that that you'll have the opportunity to review that, and once you do, I would very much be interested in getting your perspective and your staff can get back with mine.
Absolutely,
on the
Senator.
specifics of what ought to be addressed by this dramatic proposal that we're anticipating. Again, I'm hearing a lot of rumors about what's in it. I know a lot of people are talking about what's in it. I'd be interested in your perspective once you have a chance to see the draft. I think that we ought to keep in mind the fact that we've been through some very real-world banking stress. When you think about what's happened through the pandemic, what we've navigated with Silicon Valley Bank, with Credit Suisse, and it's tested the large banks. And I think they've done fairly well through this process. So again, I'm looking at this very, very keenly in my eye, and I'll be very interested to see where you land on this too, what your concerns might be, and again, what you think this might address. But what I want to make sure that we don't do is use this in some way as an effort to backdoor certain changes that some of my colleagues would like to see, ideological changes that don't have anything to do with the strength and security and soundness of the banking system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Haggerty. Senator Warner from Virginia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My apologies to my colleague from the bottom. Before Senator Haggerty leaves, I'd like to make a couple of quick comments. One, I think you're right on the central bank digital currency. I was concerned prior to COVID that China, by moving aggressively with the digital yuan, and with Chinese tourists flooding Europe, that might become a default international standard. Mr. Chairman, I think we had hearings on this earlier. I think it would be time to revisit it. I don't feel this maybe as strongly as Senator Haggerty, but I sure as heck would like to get further educated. I know we've looked at this from the Intel side, but I would hope we would.
Senator Warner, I certainly respect your opinion on this too, and you have a different perspective in your role as chair of the Intel Committee. In our role in this subcommittee here, in the Banking Committee,
I think it's time to revisit. And I do want to actually mention, again, Senator Haggerty's point to Dr. Kugler. It's nice to see you, but your colleagues who I've had the chance of supporting in the past, I think we got to have appropriate safety and soundness standards. But I do worry when we've got as aggressive a monetary policy we have at this moment in time, that if there's not a phase-in on some of these new capital standards, we could have the perfect storm of these two entities intersecting and dramatically decreasing access to credit at a moment when we've got large segments of our economy, commercial real estate in particular, could really be hit hard. So I do hope, recognizing that this more falls into Vice Chair Barr's standpoint, that intersection, and I just worry that this could be that time when monetary policy and safety and soundness, both on their own, might be worthwhile and appropriate, but could have an intersection point on access to capital. And that, Dr. Kugler, is going to lead me to my first question for you, and congratulations on your nomination. Because I know Dr. Cook and Dr. Jefferson, for a lesser extent, we talked about this issue, which is near and dear to my heart, and a whole lot of us on this committee, and that's access to capital issues for underserved communities. Was very proud of the fact that working with then Chair Crapo, maybe not then Chair Crapo, but during the Trump administration, we actually got $12 billion, $3 billion in grants, $9 billion in Tier 1 capital for minority depository institutions and community development financial institutions, CDFIs. We've now created a caucus that continues to grow. I think we're up to about 20 bipartisan members. CDFIs are kind of an underserved part of the community, but they have, by this Tier 1 capital that's gone out, and again, Dr. Cook, I know, was on the board of one, we've seen an outward lending uptick of about 40-some% from this Tier 1 capital. We are actually now working, again, Senator Crapo, Deputy Secretary Adriana, and I, on getting many of the corporates who, in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd, promised they would do things. They promised about $300 billion. $5 billion was all that we've been able to track, but we got $1 billion of additional commitments of deposits in CDFIs, and some of this money has to be sticky, because if not, you could have, in a world of internet-based runs, the same phenomena, and frankly, CDFIs with downturn could be the first victims, even though we've upped their capital, could be the first victims of capital flight. So trying to get these companies with large balance sheets to put at least a year-long capital into CDFIs. This is quickly turning into a monologue, not a question, but I know your colleagues are already supportive. You, as a labor economist, I hope and would believe would have a strong interest in making sure we have access to capital across all communities, and particularly Black and brown communities, bore the brunt of COVID, their businesses. So could you, in this last minute, address that issue of CDFIs and MDIs and their role in the overall lending environment in the country?
Thank you very much, Senator Warner, for that question. I truly believe that a healthy and a strong banking system requires a diverse banking system with a diversity of sizes. But in particular, I think that small and community banks play a key role in providing credit to low and moderate income communities. So I truly believe they play a critical role. I agree with you. I think additional resources are important for CDFIs and MDIs and WDIs, as well as technical assistance, but also ensuring that they're not overburdened. So I think there are many ways to support CDFIs, and I would certainly work to support them. I believe that they need to serve all communities across the country, including rural communities, underserved urban communities, and also native land areas. So we need to reach all Americans, and we need to make sure everybody has access to credit in a way that allows them to prosper.
Well, again, as you know, and again, Dr. Cook having served on one, I don't think you're going to get a chance to answer this. My time's expired, but CDFIs, by their definition, have to serve 60% low and moderate income individuals. While I applaud a lot of our community banks, CDFIs have a much greater focus, and I think they need that extra support. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Warner. Senator Warren of Massachusetts is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to our nominees who, like every one of President Biden's Democratic Fed nominees, have committed to the strongest ethics standards in the history of the Fed. Thank you for that. The single biggest threat to our banking system is concentration. 3 bank failures this spring reminded us that too big to fail is still alive and kicking in the banking industry. Little banks, even mid-sized banks, don't pose those risks to our economy. But when multi-billion-dollar banks stumble, taxpayers are ultimately on the hook. Even though we know about these risks, the big banks keep merging with other banks and getting bigger and bigger. But every one of those mergers must, by law, be approved by our financial regulators before they can go through. Despite the too big to fail dangers, the Fed, the FDIC, and the OCC have not formally rejected a bank merger application in more than 15 years. Now, President Biden knows that this is a serious problem. That's why he issued an executive order directing banking agencies to revamp bank merger review process and to use it to, and I'll quote him here, guard against excessive market power. As part of the Fed, you all would be called on to review and approve any big bank merger applications. So I just want to go down the line here. Dr. Jefferson, do you agree with President Biden that we need to strengthen the bank merger review process to protect against consolidation?
Thank you, Senator, for that question. And I want to contextualize my response a little bit, if you would allow me. The guidance, we follow the requirements given to us, the laws given to us by the Congress in determining mergers according to competitiveness, compliance with the Community Reinvestment Act, and the managerial competency for the...
Dr. Jefferson, I know the law here. Mm-hmm. The question I'm asking you is you are about to have to face this question about the bank merger review process that is yours, the Fed's. That's what the law says. You get the power here. And all I'm asking is, do you agree with the president that we need to strengthen the bank merger review process to protect against consolidation? It's a pretty simple question. Yes?
Well, Senator, yes. I mean, I want
I'll
to...
take yes.
Okay. But I also like to contextualize what is happening in these processes. So the banks are aware of the law, just as you have stipulated. And so we don't want too much consolidation. That's exactly right.
I'll take that then as a yes. That's all I'm looking for here.
Okay.
Is that consolidation is a problem. Bank merger review guidelines are one way to beat back some of this consolidation drift that we seem to be heading into. Can I just settle this on a yes?
You can settle this in saying that we appreciate the fact that we have a diversity of banks in the economy, and that we would not want too much consolidation. I agree with that wholeheartedly.
Okay, I just want to go down the line here, but I got to tell you, I find your answer really troubling, that you can't just say yes. Dr. Cook,
Senators,
about you.
Thank you for that question. So I'm not familiar with what President Biden said, but as a member of the Committee on Financial Stability, I have a broad host of concerns related to safeguarding the financial system. And one of those issues happens to be concentration among a lot of other factors. So I would look forward to, if any proposal comes our way, look forward to reviewing it carefully.
So does that mean you think that consolidation is a problem and bank merger guidelines, which have something to do with consolidation, we should make them tougher in order to beat back consolidation?
Bank concentration is definitely a risk to financial stability. And therefore, yes, I am concerned about that.
Good. And Dr. Kugler, how about you?
Thank you, Senator Warren, and I appreciated talking about these issues in your office last week. I first want to say that I'm very grateful for your commitment to uphold the integrity and trust in our government institutions, and I was happy to sign the pledge. So getting to your question, let me say that I believe that the diversity of the banking sector is essential. Competition in the banking sector is critical. And I think it is certainly one of the factors that allows low and moderate income households to have access to credit. So I think this is very critical. I can assure you that I would consider every merger application on its own merits, that I would understand the facts, that I would understand the consequences of consolidation, and I worry about excessive consolidation. So I certainly understand that you need a diversity of sizes of banks in the economy, but I think you need that competition, and it is critical to allow low and moderate income households to have access.
You know, I just want to say I am particularly concerned because regulators allowed America's biggest bank, JP Chase, to swallow up First Republican following its May collapse, making JP Chase the biggest too big to fail bank, $200 billion bigger. And now some of those same regulators are rolling out the red carpet for even more mergers. According to a recent New York Times report, Treasury Secretary Yellen told big bank CEOs in a private meeting that she would welcome more bank mergers, in part because it would make it easier for regulators to do their job of overseeing the financial system. Encouraging giant too big to fail banks to buy up small banks so there are fewer banks to monitor would be a dangerous mistake. We need tougher bank merger review guidelines and tighter rules on big banks. I know that the Fed is working on those right now, and I expect each of you to push for the strongest version of these proposals. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Tillis of North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to all of you on your nominations, and Mr. Jefferson, particularly congratulations to you. I supported your confirmation. I intend to support your confirmation on your next step. I also want to personally thank you for the time that we spent on the phone last week. I found your insights and your candor to be a breath of fresh air. I've got a quick question. So, Mr. Barr, who's taken a look at the holistic review, and I understand, that you won't necessarily opine on what Mr. Barr is doing within his lanes, but I'm trying to square public comments he's made about the bank system being quite sound and what we all assume is going to be a decision to increase capital requirements for banks. So where do you believe that we find a balance between capital standards and I mean, how can you reconcile the person who's looking at who's responsible for this holistic review, who says the banking system is quite sound, and what we think is an eventual increase in capital requirements? Just how do you do that?
Well, Senator, I want to thank you for taking time out to speak with me last week. I also enjoyed our conversation. As you can imagine, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to speak about Vice Chair Barr's philosophies, because I know he comes before this and other committees.
That's fair enough. I anticipated your answer. You're very disciplined, but I just hope Mr. Barr understands those two have to be reconciled. So when we see his recommendations, we'll deal with them at that time. But we just had, I don't know if you were here, I know somewhere in the audience we were talking about this clawback law. The point that I made there is we're only talking about one of what I consider to be the two root causes of Silicon Valley Bank failure, Signature Bank failure. I think First Republic's slightly different category. But what I'm surprised by is that I don't know if the FDIC or the Federal Reserve, can you confirm for me whether or not the FDIC or the Federal Reserve has taken any action against supervisors that were responsible with the SVB supervision?
I can say, to my knowledge, I am not aware of that.
So if there's a general sense that there was a lapse in supervision, and even the Senate Bill 2155, for about a month or two after the collapse, was said by some of my friends and colleagues on the other side of the aisle as the root cause of the collapse. But we all know that there's optionality in there, and we know that the supervisors know that now because we're seeing an increasing rate of MRAs and MRIAs that are coming out with banks subsequent to the Silicon Valley lapse. So that suggests to me that someone didn't put their foot on the accelerator with Silicon Valley Bank, and it suggests to me that we really need a full accounting of why they did that. Why were they lax with the MRAs, the MIRAs, the outstanding MRIAs? We had the CEO here said that he was now encountering, I think, 31. I think that was the number. So it just seems to me, and actually, if any other nominees, I see you taking notes, have your own comment. It doesn't seem like we're really focusing on the second part. There was a management failure, there was management malpractice, but it seems like there was a supervisory failure and potentially supervisory malpractice. So how do we actually get to a point where that there's some accountability there? There doesn't seem to be accountability today. How do you deal with that?
Well, Senator, my recollection of Vice Chair's Barr report was that he did identify.
He pointed to supervisory lapses, which is why I'm wondering why there wasn't action taken.
Well, that, Senator, is above my pay grade in terms of determining who might.
If we get away from the specifics, but conceptually, when we look at the activities of supervision in the bank, and most people think there's a general sense that there was a lapse, and there have been people at the Fed that have stipulated that maybe there was a lapse. Why wouldn't there be a natural follow-up to hold individuals accountable, just conceptually?
Well, Senator, I think that the points that you are raising are vital for further consideration by the board. And I think that in time to come, as we learn more about what happened in this episode, it will be the case that that knowledge will be used so that going forward, and I think that's really what's critical here, Senator, is lessons learned. And what can we do in terms of...
If we get nothing more than saying maybe this group of supervisors gets a pass, but that behavior that was demonstrated there is unacceptable, so there will be consequences in the future. If we have a lapse in supervision, to me, would be a great start. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for your service to Davidson College. and look forward to supporting your nomination.
Thanks, Senator Tillis. Senator Menendez is going to take the chair. I'm really appreciative of that, but Senator Cortez Masto will ask the next questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to the nominees. Hello to the family members. This is almost done. You can almost go grab some lunch, and it's a pleasure for me always to be at these hearings, to see these incredible nominees like yourself who are willing to engage in public service, and so thank you. Thank you. It's not always easy in this environment at times. Let me bring us back to Nevada, my state. I want to talk a little bit about employment. There's sort of paradox in the workforce in Nevada. The most recent data shows Nevada is both the highest job growth and the highest unemployment rate in the country right now. We had the highest unemployment rate in the nation in April, which is about 5.4%, 2 points above the national rate of 3.4%. But we also had the largest percent increase in employment at 4.2% as well. So let me ask all three of you, and let me start, Dr. Kugler, let me start with you, and thank you for meeting with me. You have experience both at the national level as a chief economist at the Department of Labor, and also at the international level as executive director of the World Bank Group for the USA and other entities. As you consider the Federal Reserve's mandate to keep unemployment levels low, how do you consider a state like Nevada in that paradox with respect to unemployment?
Thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. It was really a pleasure having the opportunity to meet with you last week. I have to say that some of the models that the Federal Reserve uses actually takes into account both the levels as well as the changes. So what you're talking about is very important, right? Where do you start from? And are you approaching, is your trajectory moving in the right direction? So interestingly, most models consider one or the other, but I think both are really key and very, very important to consider as one is thinking about monetary policy decisions. So that's a very key question. You want to be moving in the right direction. You want to be bringing down the level, right? So that you're changing more and more rapidly, so you're eventually bringing down the level and bringing down the level of unemployment for everyone in the state of Nevada, hopefully. So that's very key. I think another key issue is how are we considering labor force participation, and how are we considering the marginally attached, for example? What's the real tightness in the labor market, which you don't usually get to consider very well in some of these measures, the standard measures of unemployment. It's helpful to broaden some of those measures of unemployment in order to consider the real tightness in the labor market, which has been a real issue when we're considering the concerns with inflation in the economy. So the other area where I think it is very key to focus on, and the Fed has been moving in this direction in its framework, is in thinking about shortages as opposed to surpluses in full employment. We're worried when people are unemployed, and that should be the focus in terms of that side of the dual mandate. It should be in achieving full employment. If we're surpassing full employment, that would only be a concern if you have a really, really tight labor market. But the concern is when you have people out of work and unable to make ends meet.
Thank you. And Dr. Jefferson and Dr. Cook, how would you share or consider unemployment rates that are seemingly contradictory with a high unemployment rate, but also what we see with the job growth as well? I'm just curious. Dr. Cook, you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for that question. It's a really important question. You and I talked about this in 2021 when I was testifying before Congress before. And I would agree with my colleague here that it's a difference in levels and changes. And what we know about strong labor markets is that they bring in people who may be at the margins of the labor market. So I think it's a good indicator. These are just people who, the unemployment rate is just people who are looking for jobs. And I think following the fact that there are jobs being added, I think is a good thing. And hopefully, the unemployment rate will follow. But it's somewhat paradoxical because you can have an increase in the labor force participation rate and have an increase in the unemployment rate at the same time, just because more people are looking for work. But that's what strong labor markets do. So I wouldn't consider them entirely contradictory if we're just in thinking economically or statistically.
Thank you.
I would just add that what you've described is a very dynamic labor market where you have certain sectors surging and other sectors releasing labor, and labor then has to be reallocated. So I definitely appreciate your concern with regards to the level of unemployment, but I would also want to share that what you've described is a dynamism in the Nevada economy, and it's going through a transition in which it will settle, I believe, eventually with higher levels of employment overall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is he still coming? Is he still coming?
Yes, sir.
Okay. We're waiting, I understand, for one more colleague. So before I begin my questions, let me take a moment to further note the outpouring of support Dr. Kugler has received. Dozens of groups, including bipartisan organizations such as the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Latino Coalition, the American Society of Hispanic Economists, have written in support of Dr. Kugler's nomination. Latino advocacy groups such as NALEO Hispanic Federation, the National Hispanic Leadership Agenda have also endorsed her. So I ask unanimous consent that these be entered into the record, and without objection, so ordered. Dr. Kugler, a key component of the Federal Reserve System is its independence, which gives it the ability to insulate itself from political pressures and implement evidence-based monetary policy. An independent Federal Reserve allows the financial system to remain stable and safe, and our economy resilient to headwinds of the day. Our country has been able to, our country has been able to wade through challenging economic times and high inflation. So as the U.S. Executive Director of the World Bank, you're clearly no stranger to economic leadership. Can you talk about your approach to data and evidence in your work at the World Bank and in academia?
Thank you very much, Senator Menendez. First, let me say how honored and humbled I am by your introductory remarks and how humbled I am by the outpour of support from the Hispanic community and many economists, bipartisan economists who have also written on my behalf. I very much share your commitment to Fed independence. I think it is critical for the Fed to be able to work well and fulfill its mandate. It allows the Fed to focus on the long-term needs of the economy as opposed to short-term political pressures. And I think that's very critical. It also allows the Fed to focus on a data-driven, evidence-based approach to policymaking, which I think is critical. We need to find out what the realities of the economy are. We need to find out the drivers of where the economy is. We need to find out where to go. All of that can be done only with objective and impartial analysis of data. So that's what I have done over the past 25 years of my career. I have actually published over 40 academic papers that are highly vetted. My colleagues know that here, that any economics paper that gets published in an economic journal is highly vetted. It gets many, many reviews. You get asked to recheck and check and triple check and check 10 times before it can be published. In terms of my policy work, my approach has always been to look at data, to understand the realities of our economy, to understand the drivers of those realities, and to understand where we need to go based on impartial evidence produced by researchers from throughout the political spectrum. So I do believe that in my work, both as chief economist at the US Department of Labor and at the World Bank, I have certainly used that approach, whether it's regards to to workforce development issues, to job creation, or at the World Bank most recently, when we come to analyze such important issues as high inflation around the world or food insecurity around the world. So that has been exactly my approach. And if confirmed, Senator Menendez, I fully commit to upholding the independence of the Federal Reserve System.
Thank you. That was the next question. I'm going to yield to Senator Warnock.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and congratulations to the nominees. Here today, we have before the committee 3 outstanding and historic nominees to the Federal Reserve who are all eminently qualified to apply their efforts to abide by the Fed's dual mandate to maximize employment and manage inflation. They will further help the board reflect the diversity of our great nation and are also all ready to maintain the safety and the soundness of our financial system. Georgia banks are sound in terms of their expertise to lend to their communities, but they're having to carefully navigate higher rates and maintain consumers' or customers' confidence following the failures of banks in other parts of the country. With higher interest rates and tightening credit conditions, small businesses especially are having trouble finding loans to help fund their growth. Meanwhile, the giant banks are spending billions on buybacks, while their consumer and small business banking revenue has sharply increased, taking money straight from Georgia's communities and delivering it to their wealthy shareholders. Dr. Cook, what actions is the Federal Reserve taking to ensure small businesses are not facing needless restraints on credit?
Thank you so much for your question, Senator, and it was a pleasure to speak with you in your office yesterday. The way we approach financial stability is to think about the optimization problem, as any economist would, and the trade-offs associated with optimizing supervision and regulation. Certainly, we don't think that community banks, for example, should be burdened with the kind of regulation that you might see for larger banking institutions. And those are the ones that typically fund small businesses. And this is why I am particularly concerned about the bank stress that has been concentrated among the regional banks that typically fund small businesses, for example. So what we're doing in terms of financial stability is to monitor very closely the ongoing effects of bank stress and making sure to monitor and making sure that the system stays sound and resilient. And I am a big supporter of the diversity of the financial system, the diversity and sizes of financial institutions. And community banks especially have deep roots in their communities and know their clients very well. So I think that's the major way that the Federal Reserve is supporting small businesses and small institutions.
I think you're right about the importance of community banks, and just to push a little more, so what support has the Federal Reserve provided small lending institutions in the wake of these collapses?
We are reviewing, as a part of Vice Chair Barr's holistic review of not just capital standards, but also this review that was already published of SVB, to learn the lessons of the failure of SVB. So I think that's one of the major things, and then to translate that into concrete steps, and that's what we're doing. So I sit on the subcommittee on smaller regional banks and community banks, and we are actively discussing the ways in which we learn the lessons and make sure that this monitoring is happening so that that part of the financial system and all of the financial system stays sound and resilient.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kugler, how would your experience at the World Bank inform your work on the Federal Reserve Board to support small businesses?
Thank you for that question, Senator Warnock. You know, it's interesting because just like we're experiencing inflation today here in the U.S. At alarming levels, that inflation is even higher if you look at around the world. Inflation in a place like Lebanon is 200%. Inflation at a place like Zimbabwe is 60%, 50% in Argentina, 35% in Turkey. So you see it throughout the world in different regions, and it's certainly much more pronounced everywhere else in the world. These are issues I have had to work with. On the other side, the recovery from the pandemic was something that I also worked on at the World Bank, and I have worked on at the World Bank. And part of that help was not only helping households, but it was helping small and medium-sized businesses recover from the pandemic or stay afloat through the pandemic so that the private sector could thrive. And when the time came to get out of the pandemic that was so painful to all of us throughout the world, then the private sector could continue to hire those households and workers that very much needed that help after the pandemic. So I have worked both on the recovery side as well as on the inflation side more recently, which just like here in the US was experienced because of supply chain disruptions, because of people withdrawing out of the labor force, and all of these exacerbated by Russia's war on Ukraine. So that has been felt even more in other continents, in other parts of the world, and I have worked very actively on all of those important issues, in particular in terms of supporting small and medium-sized businesses.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to submit the rest of my questions for the record to all three of you. Thank you to our nominees for being here today, for providing testimony, for your willingness to serve, and your families who have been enjoying, in some cases, your testimony behind you. I'm looking at the faces, and they really think you're really brilliant at the end of the day. So I can see they're all very proud. I hope we can work together as a committee to move forward quickly on today's nominees. For senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, those questions are due at 5 p.m. on Monday, June the 26th. To the nominees, we would like to have your responses by Thursday, July the 6th at noon. Again, on behalf of the chairman, thank you for your testimony today, and this hearing is adjourned.